I still feel the echo of that command. Get this pauper away from the table ringing in my ears. It was my daughter-in-law Lauren's voice, sharp as a blade, slicing through the warm chatter of my grandson's birthday dinner. I sat mid-cake bite in my favorite navy dress and pearls I'd worn for decades when she glanced at me with that sneer and barked for security. Shock froze me where I sat. Indignation flared hotter than any Thanksgiving roast I've ever roasted. All my life I'd poured love into this family hand-sewn sweaters for little Leo late-night stories of princesses who saved themselves every holiday dinner piled high with memories. And here I was, unceremoniously branded a pauper, as if financial worth ever measured a grandmother's devotion. My heart pounded so loud I swear my son Nathan heard it between his strained apologies and Lauren's scornful laughter. But beneath the sting of her humiliation, a steel-cold resolve began to form. I may have looked like a frail old woman to Lauren's polished friends, but she didn't know the truth that I built the very company where she climbed the ladder. She had no idea the paychecks she collected bore my name or the power I held to change her world in a single day. In that moment, as I felt the eyes of polished guests bore into me, I made a silent vow. Tomorrow I would rise not as their meek fixture, but as the force that would remind them all who truly held the reins. I stood on the polished stone doorstep, the late afternoon sun glinting off the brass knocker as I lifted my hand. My heart fluttered like a trapped bird in my chest. In my other hand, I clutched a small gift bag containing the hand-knit sweater I'd spent weeks on for Leo's birthday. It was a simple red sweater, soft wool the color of firelight, embroidered with tiny white stars. I took a breath and let my knuckles rap the door 3 times. Inside, voices drifted soft laughter, the clink of crystal glasses. My grandson's laughter would come next. I told myself that fearless giggle I'd heard since he first discovered his own reflection. Instead, the door swung open on a gloved hinge, and there she stood, Lauren. Her perfectly manicured fingers curled around the edge of the door. The cream coat draped around her shoulders looked as though it had been sculpted from clouds, and her high-heeled boot peeked out from a wardrobe I could never afford. She surveyed me from head to toe with cool, narrowing eyes. I felt the first sting of judgment, like a raindrop of ice. "Hello," I said, voice pitched too high. The door stopped mid-swing, held by her grip. "Oh, you're here," she replied, tone clipped. She stepped aside on her terms enough for me to see the foyer beyond marble floors' abstract art in gilded frames, silver platters on a sideboard. Even the air smelled of something expensive, like rare orchids in a greenhouse. A hush fell around us as though the walls themselves leaned in to judge me. I forced a smile. "Happy birthday, Leo." I brought him something special. I lifted the gift bag. My hand trembled, and I tucked a strand of gray-laced hair behind my ear. Lauren's eyes flicked to the bag and back to me with practiced disinterest. She didn't reach out, didn't guide me inside. Instead, she offered an imperious half-nod. "Marcus is still getting ready. Come in if you like, but—" Her glance swept over my simple black dress and faded cardigan. "Don't wander." My breath caught. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Her house. Her rules. I stepped inside, the soles of my sensible flats clicking against the marble. I felt every pair of eyes in the dining and living rooms flick toward me, then dart away. I clutched the sweater like a lifeline, every stitch a reminder that I belonged here too, that I was Leo's grandmother. The air was cool, conditioned for delicate conversation. A waiter in a tuxedo drifted by with a tray of champagne flutes. He paused, gave me a polite nod that felt more pity than welcome, and continued on. I followed Lauren's path through the foyer, feeling as though I walked in a slow-motion dream. Lauren stopped at the foot of a grand staircase and turned to me, one perfectly arched brow lifted. "There are guests already here," she said. "People from my circle. I didn't expect you to bring any rustic charm." She didn't laugh, but her words dangled like ice. I swallowed. I didn't know there'd be other guests. Marcus just said it would be a small family dinner for Leo's birthday. Even saying dinner made me wince. It sounded too formal, too stilted. Lauren's shoulders tightened. He invited well-extended invitations. "I assumed you'd appreciate something more presentable." She tapped her designer heel. "Charlotte and Greg are in the library. The Andersons are by the bar. You'll see them all soon enough." I opened the gift bag, revealing the folded sweater. "If you'll excuse me, I'd like to give this to Leo." I held it out and she nodded again on her terms, then beckoned without warmth. "The living room is down the hall to your left." I walked away, every step weighted, every thought racing. Through the wide hallway, I glimpsed curtains of silk, gleaming floors, and a crystal chandelier dripping like frozen tears. I rounded a corner into the living room, where 20-odd faces swiveled toward me, expressions ranging from polite curiosity to discreet disgust. And then, there he was, my little Leo, bright-eyed in his party hat, cheeks dusted with cake crumbs, running toward me like the sun had broken through a storm. For a moment, the entire scene blurred into the rush of grandmotherly love. He reached up arms wide, and I dropped to my knees, wrapping him in a hug so tight I could almost kiss that birthday sugar from his hair. But before I could hand him the sweater, a cool hand rested on his shoulder. Lauren's voice rapped out, "Tommy, remember what we talked about. Give Grandma a moment, but then it's time to wash your hands. She's dirty." She sounded casual, but every word she wielded was a scalpel. My fingers curled around the gift bag, and I felt the first hot prickle of tears, anger and hurt, mingling in a fire of indignation. I looked up at Lauren, her back-straight jaw set, as though I were a blemish on her spotless event. She surveyed me again, that same cold gaze that made me feel small, unworthy. But beneath the hurt, something deeper unfurled, a slow, spreading resolve. Her judgment wouldn't define me. Her door-holding and whispered scorns would not dictate my worth. I stood brushing cake-scented crumbs from the sweater and looked around at those polished faces. They saw a grandmother who didn't fit their idea of class. They didn't know I'd founded this very city's leading tech firm, built it from a single cubicle 35 years ago. They didn't know that every paycheck in this house bore my name. But I did. And neither Lauren's manicured sneer nor her lofty tone would erase the truth I carried in my blood and bones. As I straightened the sweater, I imagined the power I held, the ability to reshape her world in a single confident move. A knot tightened in my chest, not of dread, but of purpose. This was only the beginning. I stepped into the living room and felt like I'd wandered into another world. The air was cool and sweet, scented of jasmine and champagne, as crystal chandeliers scattered prisms of light across polished hardwood floors. Guests drifted through clusters of conversation, their laughter low and practiced voices, lilting with the sort of whispered importance I'd only glimpsed in society columns. I clutched my small gift bag a little tighter, the soft wool sweater for Leo tucked safely inside. My black dress felt conspicuously plain against the gleaming marble fireplace and the gilded mirror reflecting rows of champagne flutes. Women in silk gowns lingered by a silver service cart, gossiping over fluted glasses of sparkling wine. Men in crisp tuxedos discussed business ventures and summer retreats in the Hamptons' voices, smooth with self-assurance. Lauren hovered nearby in her cloud-white coat, nodding at each polished stranger as if greeting royalty. I watched her tilt her head, hair perfectly coiled, as she slipped effortlessly from one group to another. Each hand she extended was manicured, each smile sharp enough to cut. I remembered the warmth of Nathan's childhood grin, the way he used to greet me at the door with open arms. Here, I felt nothing but the cool distance of polished faces. A waiter passed with hors d'oeuvres on a silver tray, tiny smoked salmon blinis, caviar-topped spoons, candies in sugar bowls. I reached for a single canapé, then thought better of it, realizing my stomach had knotted into a tight coil. I set it back and scanned the room for Leo, my heart fluttering. There by the fireplace hearth stood my grandson, his bright eyes shining under a little paper crown. He held a toy car in one hand, crumbs dotting his cheek. Before I could move, a soft voice beside me said, "Evelyn Carter." I turned to see Mrs. Langford draped in pearls and sable, tilting her head. "I remember your name from the gala last spring. Nathan spoke of your cleaning company's charity program." Her tone was polite but cool, and I realized she meant my tech cleanup service outsourced night cleaning, never a charity. I forced a courteous smile. "Well, it's now a scholarship fund for the children of our long-term staff," I said gently, hoping to shift the focus. Mrs. Langford's eyes flicked to my dress. "How modest." She sipped her champagne and moved on as though tasting something too bitter. I cleared my throat and kept walking, weaving through columns of guests. Conversations paused briefly as I passed a murmur of recognition, then a reshuffling of distance. I felt their gazes trace my simple attire, as if admiring a piece of outsider art. My pearls felt heavy, my shoes too sturdy for this glittering stage. I rounded an antique console table piled with leather-bound books and caught sight of Nathan near the window, talking quietly with Charlotte Blakely, the city councilwoman. His posture was stiff. Each laugh he offered sounded strained. Charlotte's bright red gown brushed his arm as she spoke, and I saw the moment Lauren joined them leaning in, flipping her hair the picture of privileged poise. My chest tightened. I remembered all the times Nathan and I lingered over lemonade on my front porch, the sun warm on our shoulders, his stories of school and dreams tumbling out eagerly. Now he stood across the room in a tailored suit, speaking in measured tones about political endorsements and luxury real estate. My soles felt glued to the Persian rug's intricate pattern. I yearned for Leo's fearless hug, the way he wrapped his little arms around my neck and whispered, "Grandma, I love your stories." Here, the only stories people cared about were profit margins and social clout. I crossed the room in small, determined steps, holding my chin high, because no matter how their eyes judged me, I was still Leo's grandmother and founder of the company that put food on Lauren's table. I paused beside a tall vase of white peonies and inhaled their heady scent, anchoring myself. A waiter approached and offered a glass of water. I accepted it gratefully and lifted the cool crystal to my lips. The condensation slipped down my fingers, warming them with a reminder that I was alive, more alive than any society guest who treated me like a fading ornament. At the far end of the room, Leo spotted me and broke away from his playmates, barely older children in mini-suits and tiaras, and ran straight toward me. In that instant, the world narrowed to his outstretched arms. I knelt, and he fell into my embrace, pressing his sticky-cheeked face against my shoulder. "Grandma," he crowed. His laughter cut through the formal tones like sunlight through storm clouds. I buried my face in his hair, inhaling the faint scent of birthday cake and childhood innocence. Lauren's voice echoed behind us. "Tommy, remember what we said? Wash your hands first." But Leo didn't budge. His warmth radiated into my bone-tired heart, cutting away the chill of fine china and whispered glances. I hugged him tighter, feeling the soft hum of kinship in his grip. I caught the reflection of our figures in the gilded mirror. Him in bright paper, crowned me in my simple black dress, framed by chandeliers that sparkled like distant stars. I whispered into his hair, "I've missed you, sweetheart." For that moment, nothing else mattered. The glittering gathering Lauren's haughty circle, the hush of society's judgments, all faded into the soft echo of my grandson's pure love. And as I held him close, I knew that whatever storms awaited beyond this room, I would face them with the warmth of his embrace burning bright inside me. I hugged Leo tighter, feeling his small body tremble with excitement against my chest. His sticky fingers fisted in the hem of my dress as he whispered, "Grandma, open it now." I reached into the gift bag and lifted the soft red sweater wool the color of firelight, tiny white stars stitched across the front. I untied my wrapping ribbon and unfolded my labor of love, marveling at how perfectly it would fit his little shoulders. "Here you go, darling," I murmured, lifting him so he could peer at the sweater. His dark eyes widened. "You made this?" he asked, voice full of wonder. "Just for me." I nodded, cheeks warm. Every stitch I said, lifting the sweater against his chest, imagining the way his cheeks would puff out as he wrapped his arms around me. Before I could slip it over his head, a cool hand landed on Leo's shoulder. He froze and looked up into Lauren's sharp eyes, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Tommy, honey," she said softly, voice as precise as a surgeon's incision. "Remember what we talked about. Grandma needs to wash her hands first." Leo's face crumpled, confusion clouding his bright grin. He turned back to me, the sweater slipping from his small fingers. "But Grandma," he began, and I can still hear the crack in his voice. Lauren interjected before I could soothe him. "Sweetheart, I said go wash your hands. It's time to play with your cousins." She released his shoulder and turned away, dragging Leo off my lap. His feet shuffled as he glanced back at me, the sweater drooping from his grasp. I tried to call after him, but the knot in my throat swallowed my voice. He let go of the sweater and scampered down the room, joining the other children clustered around the television, their voices a mingled hum of play. The red sweater lay folded on my lap, each star a silent witness to the sharpness of Lauren's command. I sat there, heart-pounding sweater in hand, as the soft murmur of guests resumed. The polished voices of wealthy friends floated back vacation plans, in Nantucket yacht purchases, investment portfolios, none of it touched by the raw sting of humiliation that tightened around me. I pressed the sweater to my cheek, feeling its warmth, wishing it could protect me from what Lauren had done. A waiter passed with a silver tray of sandwiches and offered me one with a polite nod. I shook my head, too lost to eat. I wanted to run to the kitchen to sob into a sink of dishes where my tears wouldn't be so publicly displayed. Instead, I folded the sweater gently and placed it back in the bag, each crease folding away my hope. Lauren drifted by in her cream coat, laughter sparkling, as she greeted another guest. I watched her, the woman who had overturned my world in a breath, and felt anger surge beneath my ribs. How dare she treat my grandson this way? How dare she turn his loyalty into a weapon against me? I stood pressing my legs through a tide of humiliation and followed her at a distance. I caught her eye and held her gaze. She looked away, tracing a rim of her glass as though I were too coarse for her refined party. The chandelier light glinted off her high heels, and I felt the difference between our worlds so sharply I shivered. "Lauren," I said, voice low but carrying. She turned, expression cool. "Yes." Her single word felt like a challenge. About the sweater, I began pulling it from the bag and holding it out. The red stitches glowed like embers beneath the chandelier. I made this for Leo's birthday. Would you please let him have it? Her lips quirked in what passed for a smile. Thank you, Evelyn, she said in a tone that sounded like finality. But I think it's best he keep playing. It's almost time for cake. She gestured toward the dining room eyes sliding past mine. Shall we? I clenched my fists, the sweater slipping from my fingers, and let it fall to the floor. The wool pooled around my feet, bright and unwanted. I could see every guest's face turn toward us. Curiosity, pity, a ripple of discomfort. Lauren swept past me, shoulders back, as I knelt to gather the sweater. The edge snagged on the carpet. I pulled it free and held it against my chest, breath shaking. Leo's laughter echoed from the TV corner, innocent and unknowing. My mother heart broke again harder this time because I'd believed in that moment that nothing could separate me from my grandson's love. But Lauren had managed it with a single command. I stood slowly, hands clutching the sweater. The guests resumed their polite chatter as though nothing had happened. Lauren disappeared into the dining room doorway. Nathan appeared beside me, eyes soft with apology. I'm so sorry, Mom, he whispered. I tried to stop it. His voice trembled. I pressed the sweater into his hands. Take it to him, I said quietly. He needs it more than I do. He nodded, lifting the sweater gently as though handling something fragile and precious. With one last glance at me, a look of sorrow and resolve, he slipped into the dining room, tucking the gift under his arm. I swallowed chest tight. The soft padding of guests' feet on carpet sounded so distant. I traced the stained wooden floor beneath me and realized how far I'd fallen from the warmth of home into this gilded cage. The glinting chandeliers overhead shone like cold stars as I sank onto a nearby chair, gift bag empty in my lap, and closed my eyes, fighting for the steady breath that would carry me through the rest of this night. Because I knew this story wasn't over. Not yet. I sank into the high-back dining chair, the ivory linen slipping beneath me like a spotlight on my every misstep. The table stretched on, gleaming with silver flatware and porcelain plates too fine to touch without gloves. Lauren slid into her seat beside Nathan, folding her napkin with crisp precision. I clutched mine as though it were the only lifeline I had left. A waiter poured the first course, delicate lobster bisque, pale gold and silky. I lifted the spoon, but my hands trembled so badly I nearly tipped the bowl. I forced it steady, lifted a spoonful, and let the warm broth hit my tongue. It should have tasted of butter and brine of summer evenings by the sea. Instead, it felt like ash, each salty note tainted by Lauren's earlier words. Evelyn, Lauren said, voice soft so everyone near us could hear, I hear your little cleaning company is expanding into commercial contracts. She spoke little, as though it were a curse word. The hush around the table cracked like ice in winter. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter drifted from the other end, followed by a murmur. Oh, she cleans offices. How humble. Another guest, a banker in a midnight blue suit, raised an eyebrow and offered me a sympathetic smile, pity in his eyes. I forced my shoulders down and turned to the banker. Yes, I said, voice tight. We're proud of it. I lifted another spoonful of bisque, fanning it around my mouth before swallowing. Warmth flickered through my chest, but my heart felt crushed. Nathan leaned in, his voice quiet. Mom, ignore her, he whispered. His hand brushed mine across the table, a silent apology. I felt his sympathy like a balm, gentle, but not enough to heal the wound. Lauren's laugh chimed like breaking glass. Proud of mopping floors, Grandma. She lilted the words as though they were a masquerade invitation, underneath sharp and cutting. I'm sure your staff appreciates your hands-on approach. I set down my spoon, silver clinking against the bowl. I stared at Lauren, her styled hair haloed by chandelier light, her designer dress a proclamation of her status. For a moment, I saw the child she once was, the innocent girl who might have been kinder. But that vision slipped away, replaced by the woman before me, one who trafficked in cruelty. I cleared my throat. We provide jobs for people who value stable work day and night, I said, voice firm, despite the flame in my throat. Someone has to keep offices running safely after hours. I looked around. The guests had shifted in their seats, their eyes flicking between Lauren and me as though waiting for a punchline. Lauren leaned back, placing her napkin on her lap with exaggerated calm. Of course, she said. We all rely on service workers. But I suppose there's a difference between paying someone to clean up after you and owning the company they work for. She paused, arching an eyebrow. Who knew a hush? Settled like a weighted blanket. I'd always known how the world saw me, a grandmother in simple clothes wielding knitting needles rather than a corporate briefcase. But this was different. This was a deliberate unveiling of my status as a cleaning company owner, meant to reduce me to the stereotype she found so distasteful. I gripped the edge of the table. The polished surface bit into my palms. My bisque grew cold in its bowl steam, no longer swirling like spirits of the sea. I took a breath and let it out slowly. Yes, I said, at last, I do own that company. I built it from scratch 35 years ago. We employ over 2,000 people across 3 states. I let my words hang heavy with truth. Lauren's smile faltered for an infinitesimal instant before she regained composure. Impressive, she said, tone thin. Still, humble work. I met her gaze undeterred. The world needs it, I said. In every skyscraper, every office tower, someone has to make sure the floors are safe and the restrooms sanitized. It's honest, essential work. I dared the banker to meet my eyes. He shifted in his seat, guilt flickering in his expression. Nathan cleared his throat and raised his wine glass. To my mother, he said, voice steady, who taught me that no work is beneath anyone. Cheers. His glass chimed against the others. For a brief moment, the table glowed with warmth as each guest sipped in respect, if reluctantly. Lauren's lips pressed into a thin line. She sipped her own wine, eyes downcast for a heartbeat, then shot a glance at me. I saw hurt flicker there, perhaps the first sign that she recognized my worth. But pride was a fortress. She wouldn't let empathy in. The main course arrived, seared sea bass atop a tangle of asparagus and heirloom carrots. I pricked at the fish, each bite a choreography of restraint. I tasted butter lemon, an echo of ocean waves, and felt a spark of joy for the flavors themselves. But Lauren's voice cut in again. Mother still eating like that. I thought we agreed on something more nutritious. Her tone was airy, but everyone heard the disdain. I lifted a slender carrot, recalling how I taught Leo to choose vegetables over sweets. I believe in balance, I said. A little indulgence on birthdays is good for the soul. She laughed lightly. How sweet! Well, I've adjusted my own diet, organic only. She raised a sneering eyebrow. Some of us have to maintain our health for the rigors of corporate life. I set down my fork. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I looked at Nathan, his blind love for his wife battling with the shame in his eyes. Corporate life, I repeated softly. Isn't it interesting that the person who built the company sits here, while others scramble to uphold its image? My voice was soft, but each word landed like a gavel. Lauren's face paled. Guests looked away, uncomfortable, at the undercurrent of power shifting. Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it. The waiter hovered, unsure whether to refill my wine. I waved him off, ready to leave the wine untouched if it meant reclaiming my dignity. The room felt tight, as though every chandelier shard weighed on my shoulders. I took a deep breath, steadying the tremor in my voice. I would not be cowed. I would not let her words define me. Before Lauren could reply, I rose from the table. The chair scraped against marble. All eyes turned. I held my head high, my chest expanding with newfound strength. I wrapped my fingers around the chair's back and looked at Lauren with calm resolve. "Enjoy the rest of your dinner," I said, voice clear. "I believe you have cake waiting." And with that, I turned and walked away, each step echoing in the hush of the room, no longer seeking approval, but demanding respect for the life I'd built and the people I'd employed. The chocolate soufflé arrived like a promise, rich, dark mounds of cake, crowned with a swirl of whipped cream. I watched it set before me, the soft light from the chandelier making the glossy surface gleam. I lifted my fork, anticipating the warm center that would ooze like melted velvet across my tongue. Just as I drew the silver utensil toward my lips, a small voice pierced the hushed din. Grandma Leo's bright face appeared at my side. He scrambled onto my lap, chocolate-smeared fingers clinging to my shoulders. The fork clattered to the plate as I caught him, heart bursting with the joy of his surprise visit. His laughter melded with mine as I ruffled his hair, desperately tucking stray crumbs before they fell on my dress. But the moment shattered the polished veneer when Lauren's porcelain mask cracked. She rose abruptly, chair legs skidding against the marble floor. I froze Leo, tucked protectively against my chest as she swept toward us. Her silk gown rippled like water as she crossed the table, face flushed with fury. "Tommy," she hissed, voice low but sharp enough to cut through the crystal lull. "Get down from there right now." Leo's giggle faded to a whimper. He clutched the neckline of my dress, but he began eyes wide. Lauren's hand closed around his arm, lifting him from my lap so abruptly he stumbled. My fork slipped from my hand and fell to the carpet with a soft clang. The soufflé trembled. Mom Nathan tried to intervene, his voice thick with regret. "Please." Lauren held up a perfectly manicured hand. "No," she said, voice ice. She turned away from Nathan, her gaze sweeping the assembled guests who had fallen into an embarrassed hush. "This is unacceptable." I set Leo on the floor and placed my hands on the table, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would burst. "Lauren, I began, but my words faltered under her glare. She raised her voice, crisp and commanding. "Security." A hush fell so thick, the waiters stopped mid-step. Hearts raced. I could see the question in every guest's eyes. What had I done? I stared at Lauren, mind reeling, unable to form a coherent sentence. The word security echoed in my ears, a summons I never expected at my grandson's birthday party. Moments later, 2 uniformed men appeared at the door, faces impassive. Their polished shoes clicked on the marble as they approached. I looked at Nathan. His eyes were heavy with shame, apologies fought back on his lips. "Evelyn Carter," one of them asked, tone polite but firm. My throat closed. Lauren stood beside me, arms folded triumphant in her cruelty. "Yes," I managed, voice a whisper. I looked around at the room, at the crushed soufflé, the abandoned plates, the unspoken judgment in the upturned faces. The men placed a gloved hand on either elbow. "Ma'am, please come with us." I felt Leo's small hand slip from mine. I turned to scoop him into my arms, to wrap him in the warmth of my embrace one last time. but Lauren's haughty voice stopped me. "Leave him," she said, cold as a winter wind. "He's better off with us." I stared at her, my own flesh and blood betraying me in front of friends and strangers alike. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the chandeliers into halos of accusation. I could feel the weight of every polished gaze, the shame pressing down like lead. I opened my mouth tasting of bitter regret, but the men guided me gently toward the door. I held my head high despite the sear of humiliation and allowed them to escort me through the dining room past the circle of wounded stares. The front door loomed ahead, smooth-painted wood that should have welcomed me every time I visited my son's house. But now it stood cold, a barrier between me and the people I loved. As the men pushed it open, a draft of evening air washed over me. I blinked, tears slipping down my cheeks, and stepped into the hallway. Behind me, I heard the soft click of the door, closing, a sound final and suffocating. I stood alone in the quiet, cradling the empty soufflé plate in my arms, the echo of Lauren's command still ringing in my ears. In that instant, the golden promise of the party dissolved into the cold reality of rejection. And as I felt the evening air swirl around me, I realized that I would never again allow anyone to define my worth. I slid into the driver's seat of my car and closed the door on that gilded world forever. The engine's hum was a welcome reminder of reality of control. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from the slow burn of fury ignited by Lauren's cruelty. I pressed my head back against the leather and let out a shaky breath, tasting the night air that seeped in through the cracked window. My grandson, my own flesh and blood, had been torn from my lap, like I was some unwelcome ghost. He'd looked back at me with that fractured trust, and I'd felt my heart break in two. Yet buried beneath the sting of rejection, a steel-cold resolve was coalescing. It began as a flicker, a thought in the shadow of my anger. She doesn't know who she's dealing with. For 35 years, I had worn sensible shoes and quiet sweaters, kept my head down, and built Meridian Technologies from a scrappy basement startup into the region's leading tech enterprise. I had seen men dismiss me, colleagues betray me, clients underestimate me. I'd answered every doubt with innovation, every insult with success. Now, the same woman who spent her days marketing my company's brand had publicly humiliated me at my own grandson's birthday, believing me nothing more than a pauper worthy of a security escort. Lauren had no clue that the paychecks she bragged about signing bore my signature. She had no idea that every polished glass and silver tray in her dining room was financed in part by my company's contracts. The irony was almost delicious. But this wasn't about irony, it was about power, the power I had quietly wielded while donning the cloak of domesticity. I placed my palm against the steering wheel, feeling its cool leather beneath my fingertips. The sweet glow of the dashboard lights focused my thoughts. Tomorrow, I'd drive past these manicured lawns and curated facades, not as the demolished grandmother, but as the woman who sat at the top floor of Meridian's headquarters, the founder and CEO. I'd walked these roads every day, yet Lauren never suspected my presence here. I thought of her porcelain coat silhouette, her haughty posture, the way she measured my worth by the simplicity of my attire. She had weaponized social class against me, but she forgot that I had invented the very social ladder she'd been climbing. I'd poured years of grit and midnight oil into crafting a corporation that employed thousands, engineers, marketers, support staff, people she'd belittled as maintenance, unaware that they were the backbone of her cushioned lifestyle. My breath steadied as I parked under a street lamp, the orange halo illuminating my reflection in the rearview mirror. My silver hair framed a face that had learned resilience the way others learn to walk steadily, imperceptibly. I saw in my own eyes the quiet strength that had refused to shrink despite every condescension. And tonight, that strength would fuel my next move. I unbuckled my seatbelt and pressed a finger to my phone, opening the contact labeled CFO. In 3 taps, I would arrange an after-hours review of personnel files, financial allocations, and company policies. I'd ensure no one in Lauren's division could escape scrutiny, not HR, not her supervisor, not the polished mask she hid behind. My fingers lingered on the drafts folder where an email sat unsent, drafted months ago, proposed internal restructuring. It outlined a plan to rotate management through every department marketing IT facilities, even the custodial staff, so that no one held power without experiencing the humbling realities of every role. I'd once shelved it, worried about the fallout, but tonight it read like a promise of justice. A knock on the driver's side window startled me. I looked up to see Leo's babysitter, her worried eyes shining. "Mrs. Carter," she called softly. "Everything okay in here?" I slipped on a gentle smile. "Just catching my breath," I said. "I'll drive him home tomorrow." She hesitated, lingering concern in her gaze, then nodded. "Take care of yourself." She disappeared into the night, leaving me alone with the engine's soft purr. I closed my eyes for a moment and centered myself in the space between my revenge and my restraint. I was no longer the dismayed grandmother of 2 hours ago. I had transformed into the architect of consequences, the CEO, whose next actions would remind everyone from the boardroom to the banquet hall just whose vision had built this empire. Tomorrow, Lauren would arrive at work, expecting the same routine. But I would ensure her day began with an email flagged urgent and ended with a reassignment that placed her squarely in the trenches she had so gleefully dismissed. She would learn through every muscle ache and searing embarrassment that power was not a matter of polished speech and trimmed nails, but of the authority to shape destinies. And I, Evelyn Carter, would teach her a lesson she would never forget. I arrived at Meridian Technologies at 6:15 a.m., 2 hours before anyone else would dare to set foot inside. The glass-fronted lobby was deserted, the marble floors gleaming under the soft glow of recessed lighting. My heels clicked against the polished tile as I navigated past the security desk. Miguel flashed me a courteous nod and rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. The hallway was hushed carpet muffling my steps until I reached my private wing. I swiped my executive keycard and slipped into my office, the city skyline stretching beyond floor-to-ceiling windows like an endless promise. My mahogany desk sat unobstructed papers neatly stacked, and the morning's coffee still warm in a china cup. I placed my purse down and let my shoulders drop for the first time since last night's ordeal. Moments later, Helen arrived, her dark hair pulled into a neat bun, her pinstriped suit as impeccable as always. She carried a slim stack of manila folders. "You wanted these pulled, Mrs. Carter?" she asked, voice quiet but curious. I nodded and offered her a seat. "Thank you, Helen. Let's begin with Lauren Mitchell's file." I watched her place the folders before me, each labeled with dates and codes I recognized from human resources. My pulse quickened. This was the evidence I needed. Helen closed the door and leaned against the credenza. "I've never seen so many complaints in one division," she murmured. I didn't need to ask which they were the ones she'd quietly flagged for me last quarter. I peeled open the first folder. The header read, "Formal Complaint Age Discrimination," dated 7 months ago. A note from Margaret Chen, a 61-year-old accountant, detailed how Lauren publicly chastised her in a budget meeting, calling her outdated and suggesting she step aside for someone with modern expertise. The complaint had been dismissed because Lauren's manager vouched for her high standards. I ran my finger down the page, tracing every damning word. "Helen," I said softly, "why wasn't this escalated?" Helen shook her head. The manager believed it was performance-based feedback. And from what I gather, no one wanted to challenge Lauren. She's a rising star in marketing. I opened the next folder, Incident Report, Unauthorized Project Assignment. This one detailed how Lauren had commandeered IT support for personal marketing initiatives, berating Robert Williams, 58 years old, for his slow processing speed and refusing to acknowledge his 2 decades of service. Again, HR dismissed the claim after Lauren's supervisor praised her invaluable contributions. My chest tightened. I could almost hear Robert's steady voice clocking overtime in frustration. I flipped to the third file, HR case hostile work environment. Janet Rodriguez, 63, custodial supervisor, recounted being transferred to the night shift after Lauren deemed her unprofessional for delaying a last-minute schedule change. The transfer note even praised Lauren's decisiveness. I looked up at Helen, anger coiling in my stomach. "This pattern isn't a series of isolated incidents," I said. "It's systemic. She weaponizes age against anyone she sees as weaker." Helen's eyes were solemn. "When you wanted these files, I assumed it was related to your succession plan. I didn't realize the extent of the issue." I closed the folder and stood, heading to the glass wall that overlooked the city. The sunrise painted the skyline in gold, oblivious to the turmoil we were about to unleash. I could feel the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders, the obligation to protect my employees, and send a message that cruelty and bias had no place here. Helen hesitated. "What would you like me to do next?" I turned back to face her. "Compile every record, emails, performance reviews, colleague feedback that involves Lauren's interactions with any employee over 50. I want a complete dossier. Also, set up meetings with each complainant if they're still with us." She nodded and hurried out, leaving me alone with the files and the hum of the air conditioner. I sank back into my leather chair, fingertips steepled under my chin. The name Lauren Mitchell on my organizational chart no longer carried garish promise. It bore the stain of injustice. I opened my laptop and typed a secure message to HR. "Please arrange an urgent audit of all marketing division personnel actions. I will review the results personally by noon." My words felt final, a declaration of accountability that would ripple through every department. I thought of last night, of being escorted out by security at my grandson's birthday. That humiliation had kindled a fire within me. It was time to wield my true authority. By 7:30 a.m., as my senior executives trickled in, I was prepared. I would address them in the conference room, ensuring no one misunderstood at Meridian Technologies respect and dignity were non-negotiable. Age bias and cruelty would not be tolerated. I inhaled deeply, the city's pulse alive below. This investigation would be thorough, unflinching, and in doing so, I would reclaim not only my grandson's celebration, but the integrity of every person who cleaned our buildings, coded our software, or served our coffee. Because here, behind these windows, under my watch, everyone mattered. And no one, not even my own daughter-in-law, would be exempt from the consequences of her actions. I didn't have to wait long. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, my executive assistant Helen tapped twice on my office door and slipped inside. "She's here, Mrs. Carter," she whispered, indicating Lauren Mitchell standing nervously in the hallway. Her cream coat was gone, replaced by a plain blouse and slacks, her armor stripped away. I nodded and motioned to the empty chair opposite me. "Thank you, Helen. Please close the door." The click of the lock sounded louder than any gavel. My heart was steady with purpose, though my pulse still fluttered with the remnants of last night's indignity. Lauren entered her lips, pressed in a thin line, eyes wide behind designer glasses. She sank into the chair, hands folding in her lap, fingers drumming in that habitual rhythm she'd once used to command conference rooms. Now it looked like a nervous tick. I studied her for a long moment. "Lauren," I said, voice calm, "thank you for coming." She blinked and forced a nod. Her cheeks were flushed, and I could see the faint tremor in her left hand. "I asked you here to discuss your recent reassignment," I continued, unfolding the manila folder on my desk. The labels age discrimination, hostile environment, unauthorized personal assignments glistened like open wounds. She drew a breath. I don't understand, Evelyn. I was expecting... You were expecting what?" I leaned forward. Fingertips steepled. "A promotion, a bonus. Because you certainly wouldn't have expected consequences for terrorizing your colleagues." Each word was measured but iron hot. Lauren's face blanched. "Colleagues, those were professional disagreements. I set high standards. I know I said quietly, your standards. High for some, destructive for others." I tapped the folder. 3 formal complaints in 18 months, all dismissed because your manager said you were simply maintaining efficiency. But dismissing complaints doesn't erase them. I paused. Those employees, Margaret from accounting, Robert from IT, Janet in custodial, are the backbone of this company. And you treated them as disposable. Her breathing hitched. "It's not like that," she whispered. "It is like that," I replied. "And we cannot tolerate it any longer." I opened the folder to a page marked Incident Report, Janet Rodriguez. I slid it across the desk. "Read it if you need a reminder." Lauren stared at the document, brow furrowing. I cleared my throat. "Effective today, you have 2 choices. 1, transfer to our food services department, dishwashing station cafeteria line, alongside the same custodial staff you slandered. You will report Sunday at 6 a.m. Sharp, wear the standard uniform and perform the same duties you disparaged." I let that sink in. Lauren's eyes flickered upward. "You're kidding," she said, voice shaking. "I'm not," I said. "Or 2, you may tender your resignation immediately. I will provide a neutral reference that acknowledges your marketing skills without detailing these circumstances." I leaned back. "Your choice." Her cheeks drained of color. She glanced down at her manicured nails, then back to me. "This is..." "Blackmail," she said, voice brittle. I smiled, no warmth in it. "This is management," I said softly. "You created this situation. Your actions have consequences. Choose." She pressed her lips together, eyes filling. The silence stretched taut between us. I watched as she wrestled with the realization that the cushy corner office and marketing budgets she once controlled now lay in my hands, hands that had built this empire from a single cubicle. Lauren swallowed. If I refuse the kitchen assignment," her voice trembled. "Then you resign," I said. "I will finalize your paperwork this afternoon. No severance, but you'll walk away with credibility intact, if you can call that intact." She drew in a shuddering breath. "You can't do this," she whispered. I rose and walked behind my desk, standing beside her. I laid a gentle hand on her folder. "I can, because I built this company on respect for every person, every position. You refuse to show that respect. Now you must learn it or leave." Lauren's shoulders slumped. Her gaze dropped to her hands, twisting them together as tears spilled. She rose shakily. I choose the kitchen. she said, barely audible. I nodded. Very well. Report to the basement cafeteria at 6 a.m. on Monday. Helen will send you the details. In the meantime, HR will retrieve your company badge and laptop. I couldn't help the flicker of satisfaction I felt as I saw the color drain completely from her face, recognition of her own downfall. She looked up, eyes rimmed red. I thank you, she whispered, though it sounded more like resignation than gratitude. I offered her a small nod. Good luck, Lauren. I hope you learned something from this. Helen entered with a folder. I gestured for Lauren to follow her out. As the door closed behind them, I exhaled the storm of last night, fading into a quiet triumph. I sat at my desk, hands folded, watching the doorway. I had delivered my ultimatum not through vengeance, but through justice. And in that moment, Meridian Technologies reclaimed its conscience. I slipped into the basement corridor just before dawn, swapping my tailored suit for the maintenance uniform Helen provided navy coveralls and a borrowed hairnet gloves tucked into my back pocket. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the scent of detergent and steam clung to the air. For the first time, I was truly walking in Lauren's shoes. Only here, every step was measured in humiliation. Through the service window, I spotted her at the dish pit. Her blonde hair, once curled to perfection, now drooped damp beneath the hairnet. Her designer manicure, long white tips, was chipped and stained with suds. She stood before the cavernous stainless steel sink, scrubbing the underside of a gravy boat as though it were enemy armor. I approached quietly, heart pounding, with a mixture of satisfaction and empathy. Even now, I remembered how exhausting this kind of labor could feel, how the constant steam burned the eyes and the repetitive motion ached the shoulders. But Lauren's movements were jerky, resentful, as if each plate she cleaned was a reminder of her fall. A young line cook, Maria, glanced at her and offered a gentle smile. Morning, Lauren, she said kindly, scrubbing a tray beside her. Hope you're settling in. Lauren paused, soap dripping from her gloved hands, her lips pressed into a thin line. I'm fine, she muttered, voice brittle. She set the tray aside and grabbed a stack of plates, rinsing them with enough force to send water droplets flying. Just a temporary assignment, she added, eyes flashing. I'm sure HR made a strategic decision. Maria didn't reply, pressing on with her own work. A moment later, Janet Rodriguez, the night shift supervisor who'd once been bounced to darkness by Lauren, approached with a burlap sack of potatoes. She proffered one. Need help with these, she asked, voice warm. Lauren shook her head. I'll do it, she snapped, then immediately bit her lip. The anger drained from her eyes, replaced by a hollow defeat. She yanked a potato from the sack, water droplets cascading down her blouse as she plunged her rubber-clad hands into the hash water. I watched her scrub and rinse the same tools she'd once scorned as beneath her, the same tasks she'd dismissively labeled maintenance. Now every plate she sopped and every tray she polished bore her fingerprints like a confession. I moved to a station a few feet away, pulling a dish brush from a rack. Morning, I said, voice low but friendly. First time here, Lauren glanced at me, then back at her potatoes. I've been here a few days, she said, voice flat. I know the ropes. Everyone has to start somewhere, I replied. I began to scrub a coffee pot, listening as steam hissed and suds foamed. We're the backbone of this building. No one eats, works, or even breathes in these halls without us. Her shoulders stiffened. I know. She crushed the potato beneath her glove. I never realized how gritty it is. I spared her a look. Gritty. It's honest work. My words carried the weight of decades spent building this company from the ground up. Some of us have spent careers ensuring the people at dinner parties never see what makes their plates shine. She pressed her lips together and turned back to the sink. I know, she repeated softly, almost to herself. For a fleeting moment, I thought I detected regret. But then a sharp laugh cut through the steam. A factory line technician named Luis approached fresh from the loading dock. "Hey, Lauren," he teased gently. "You're making that fancy manicure do some serious overtime." He held up a chipped nail. "How's it feel to be on the other side?" Lauren's jaw clenched. She jabbed the potato with the edge of her glove as if it were an adversary. "I'm not here by choice," she snapped. "I'm here because I have to be." Luis shrugged, stepping away with a sympathetic grin. "Well, hang in there. You'll laugh about this someday." She watched him go, face flushed. I rinsed my coffee pot and set it aside, then reached for a stack of shallow bowls. "You'll make it through." I extended a hand. "I'm Evelyn," I said. She turned, eyes narrowing. "You're not part of this," she said, dismissive. I suppressed the urge to laugh. "Hard to tell in coveralls," I replied, voice calm. "But yes, I'm not on your team." I leaned closer. "I'm your boss." Her eyes widened, disbelief crashing across her features. I held her gaze, letting the realization settle in. "I trust you remember our conversation," I said softly. "Dishwashing or resignation?" Her lip trembled. She turned back to the sink, searching the sloshing water for answers. I did what you asked," she whispered. "I showed up." I nodded. "Good. Now prove you can do it right." I gestured to the rack of trays. "Those trays piled by the ovens need cleaning in 15 minutes. Sanitize and stack them carefully. Then we'll see how you fare." Lauren lifted her chin, determination flickering. "Yes, ma'am," she said, voice unsteady but resolute. I patted her shoulder. No warmth in the touch. "I'll be watching." Then I turned back to my own station, scrubbing the bowls with steady strokes, listening to the echoing clang of tools and Lauren's renewed rhythm beside me. The hours passed in a blur of steam and suds. I watched her hands, once so poised for champagne glasses, now raw from scrub brush friction. Every chipped nail, every steaming pan, every clanging dish was an object lesson in humility. But her chin stayed lifted, and I recognized something in her eyes, respect born of vulnerability. When the last tray clicked into place, I wheeled around. "Well done," I said quietly. She looked at me uncertain. "You learned fast. Tomorrow you'll start with front-of-house responsibilities, table setup, guest turnover. I want you to feel every angle of service before we consider returning you to marketing." Her breath hitched. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded. "Don't thank me. Thank the people who've always done this work with their heads held high." I turned away, leaving her to catch her reflection in the polished steel. I walked toward the stairs, the pang of her earlier contempt fading into something stronger, vindication tempered with mercy. In Meridian's kitchens and boardrooms alike, respect would no longer be optional. And as I climbed the steps, the echo of plates and steam faded behind me, replaced by the quiet certainty of justice served. I checked my watch as I left the conference room, grabbing my tailored blazer from the back of its chair. Helen slipped into step beside me, her expression professional but sympathetic. "She's waiting by the main elevator," she whispered. I nodded, smoothing my skirt, as we walked down the quiet hallway toward the glass doors that hid the company's heart. Through the frosted glass, I could see Lauren pacing, shoulders hunched in uncertainty. Her uniform navy coveralls that used to belong to our dishwashers had been swapped for a borrowed blouse and slacks. She looked polished again, but the heat of embarrassment still flickered in her cheeks. Helen pressed the elevator call, and I joined Lauren inside. The doors slid shut, sealing us off from the bustling floors below. The control panel's lights blinked as we ascended. Lauren gripped the chrome handrail, knuckles white, casting nervous glances at me. I stood back, arms loose at my sides, letting the silence swell until it nearly rasped between us. "Good morning," I said finally, voice calm. She turned startled. "Mrs. Carter," she managed, offering a shaky nod. I was told to see you." I tapped my badge to the access reader. "Yes, you're being escorted to meet with company leadership." The doors chimed as they opened onto the 42nd floor. Lauren stepped into the wide, softly lit corridor, her breath catching at the sight of the mahogany-paneled walls and the panoramic windows that framed the city skyline. I followed her, stopping at the end of the hall, before a single frosted glass door. I took a breath to savor the moment. Lauren's fate hinged on this reveal, not just her career, but her understanding of every life she had once demeaned. I turned the handle and held the door open. "After you." She paused in the threshold, clutching her folder to her chest like a shield. The office beyond was spacious, dominated by a sweeping desk of dark walnut, a leather armchair behind it, and a vast L-shaped sofa facing a glass coffee table. The city's morning glow poured in, bathing the room in golden light. She stepped inside, eyes wide, as she took in every detail: the executive plaque on the wall, the display of awards, the discreet portraits of me in various public appearances. Her gaze flicked toward the empty chair behind the desk. I closed the door behind her and walked forward, heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I passed behind my desk, setting my blazer over its back, and let my shoulders rise into the power posture I'd cultivated over decades. Lauren sank into the chair, pressing her palms into the smooth leather seat, staring at me as though seeing a stranger. "Please have a seat," I said, gesturing to the visitor's chair across from me. She hesitated, as if debating whether she dared. Finally, she settled, folding her legs at the knee, her hands twisting in her lap. I took my place behind the desk and folded my hands. "Thank you for coming," I began. "I wanted you to experience the breadth of operations here." I tapped the desk. "From dishwashing to boardroom, you've seen how every piece matters." Her eyes flickered uncertainty, warring with defiance. I understand," she said. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "Lauren, I founded this company 35 years ago as Evelyn Carter, not the soft-faced grandmother you met at a birthday party, but a woman determined to build something greater than herself. I answered to no one but my vision, and I've spent my life ensuring everyone here is treated with respect, regardless of age, role, or station." Her breath caught. I didn't know." Her voice trembled. I thought I was doing the right thing." I let the silence settle like dust in the morning sun. Then I unfolded the folder before me and slid the first page across the desk. "Formal complaint, age discrimination." Lauren stared at her own signature on the bottom. "These are the complaints you dismissed, the colleagues you humiliated," I said softly. "Margaret Chen, Robert Williams, Janet Rodriguez, they trusted this company to value their decades of service. You chose to punish them instead." Her fingers flew to her mouth. I was under pressure," she whispered. I shook my head. "Pressure is no excuse for cruelty. Leadership demands empathy as much as standards." I opened the next page. "Hostile work environment." Lauren gasped as she recognized the dates, the language, the way her words had cut deeper than any tool. Tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I closed the folder. I could have savored her shame, but mercy stayed my hand. "You apologized once to me at that party and then called security when I refused to shrink," I said, voice steady. "This company reflects my principles. You have two choices: resign or relearn empathy from the ground up. You may return to marketing when you've completed a rotation in every department you once scorned. Facilities, IT support, custodial. And yes, the dish pit. Her face drained of color. She swallowed. Relearn? Empathy. I nodded. You'll earn your place back if you can, otherwise I'll accept your resignation today. Her lips quivered. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, conviction had replaced panic. I'll do it, she said, voice small but certain. I inclined my head. Very good. I'll have HR arrange your schedule. Welcome back to the front line where real leadership begins. She rose unsteadily and left without another word. The door closed softly and I returned to my window, watching the city pulse below. At last, I felt a quiet triumph. The woman who called security on her grandmother had learned her true place, understanding that power without compassion is empty, and that every position in this company earned its dignity. And with that, Meridian Technologies stood a little stronger, a little kinder, just as I intended. The knock at my apartment door rattled my heart, even though I'd been expecting it. I took a steadying breath, smoothed the folds of my favorite floral dress, simple and true to who I was, and opened the door to find Nathan standing there, his face drawn tight. Behind him, Lauren hovered, shoulders hunched, eyes wary. Mom, Nathan began, voice thick with tension. We need to talk, all three of us. I stepped aside and ushered them in. The scent of jasmine tea and fresh-baked scones drifted through my living room, small comforts I'd arranged to soften the edges of what I knew would be a hard conversation. I pointed to the couch. Have a seat. Nathan sat first, folding himself into the worn cushions. Lauren perched on the edge of the coffee table, fingers entwined in her lap. I settled in my armchair, folding my hands. Nathan cleared his throat. Mom, I've been torn. He looked to Lauren, then back to me. She's been through so much at work, restructuring, everyone staring at her every move. She says it's unfair. I studied him, remembering the boy who once refused to walk home alone in the dark. But so have you, Nathan. You've watched your mother humiliated at your son's birthday dinner. You've seen your company culture tested by her cruelty. Lauren's face flickered with guilt, but she remained silent. Nathan swallowed. I know. But she said you blackmailed her, that you used your position against her. His gaze sought mine. I was worried about her job, her stress. I thought maybe I was being unreasonable. Please, I interrupted gently. Let's speak plainly. I leaned forward. You're worried about your wife's discomfort. That's natural. But your wife created that discomfort. She is responsible for her own actions just as I am for mine. Lauren's shoulders slumped. Nathan's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I'm sorry, he whispered. Mom, I should have defended you. He turned to Lauren. Why didn't you tell me how bad it was? He asked her quietly. Lauren looked down, voice cracking. I thought you'd side with me. I thought I could handle it alone. She glanced at me. I didn't know I was hurting people until your mother showed me the consequences. By that time, I was so angry, so proud, I didn't know how to admit I was wrong. Nathan reached out, taking her hand. Mom, he said, turning back to me. What? What do you want me to do? I inhaled the scent of jasmine and recalled the countless nights I'd worked alone to grow this company, the sacrifices to build something meaningful. Family bonds are no different. They must be tended with honesty and love. I placed a hand over my heart. I want you to stand by what's right, even when it's hard. Stand by empathy, by justice. Stand by family. He nodded, voice firm. Mom, I choose you. He looked at Lauren. And I hope you'll find a way back to all of us. Lauren's eyes filled. She rose slowly and stepped toward me. Evelyn, Her voice broke. I'm resigning. Effective today. I can't come back to that corner office, and I don't deserve it. I want to start over without your influence, but with your forgiveness if you can find it in your heart. Tears pricked behind my eyes. I rose and drew her into my arms. I forgive you, I said, voice thick. But forgiveness means we learn. Promise me you'll carry empathy forward. She nodded against my shoulder. Nathan stood by, eyes watering, and I pulled back to look at him both. This is our reckoning, I said softly, but also our renewal. In the days that followed, I finalized Lauren's resignation paperwork. No acrimony, just a clean slate. Nathan and I worked together to revise Meridian's rotation policy, ensuring no manager escaped frontline service. We implemented mandatory sensitivity training and streamlined the complaint process so every voice, regardless of position, was heard. At home, our bond healed in small moments, Nathan accompanying me to parent-teacher conferences with Leo, sharing coffee on my porch. We laughed again over old family stories, the tension of recent months melting under the warmth of our reconciled love. One Saturday afternoon, Nathan and I sat at the park bench where I once taught him to ride his bike. He handed me a folded piece of paper, a thank you note from Janet Rodriguez, now promoted to floor supervisor, her handwriting neat, her gratitude clear. I smiled, pride warming my chest. Nathan kissed my cheek. You built more than a company, he said. You built a culture of respect, starting with our family. I rested my head against his shoulder, watching Leo chase ducks on the pond. In his innocent shouts, I heard the promise of tomorrow, of a family anchored in honesty and compassion, and a company bound by dignity. And as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in robes of rose and gold, I realized that our reckoning had given birth to our renewal, a legacy of empathy I'd fight to preserve for as long as I lived.